don't get scared now.
Good evening, folks. Hope you guys had a good work week. This is Jigger Newman for Bladeslinger Plays, and continuing with our History of Horror series, we are going to be playing today what is probably the most important game in the genre. Of course, talking about the original Resident Evil. This game was released in 1996 by Capcom exclusively for the PlayStation, though it would eventually be ported to the Sega Saturn and PC, and would see numerous re-releases over the years. So, when I was playing Sweet Home and Clock Tower, I sort of talked about the state of the industry at the time. With the video game crash of '83, Nintendo was forced to market the Nintendo Entertainment System to children in order to bill it as a toy instead of a video game console. Otherwise, retailers at the time just wouldn't stock it in their stores. And that worked. They managed to revitalize the industry and all, but because of that, video games were at the time seen as just kid stuff. And because of that, hold on a sec. Okay, is this actually working? Not picking anything up. Okay, so it's working now. Sorry about that, folks. Some technical difficulties there. The stream didn't start when it was supposed to, which sucks because I was on a roll. Anyway, good afternoon, folks. Hope you had a good work week. This is Jager Newman for Bladeslinger Reviews. And today, continuing with our little history of horror games, we will be playing what is probably the most important game in the genre, and that's Resident Evil. This game was released in 1996, originally exclusively for the PlayStation, though it would eventually be ported to the Saturn and PC, and it would see several re-releases over the years. So I talked a little bit in my video on Sweet Home and Clock Tower about the state of the industry in the late 80s and early 90s, and that was sort of the perception of video games. Video games were intended for kids because that's how Nintendo was forced to market the N64 at the time. Not the N64, the Nintendo Entertainment System at the time. So because of that, you didn't get a whole lot of horror games because they were just seen as inappropriate for children. But midway through the 90s, change started to occur in the industry. Sega, in order to one-up Nintendo, started putting out games with a more mature slant to them. And that got them into a little bit of legal trouble because, families were just concerned with the violence on display in Mortal Kombat, Night Trap, and Lethal Enforcer. And with Sega marketing the games to kids, that just wasn't a good look. So because of that, came the ESRB, which at the time was seen as a bad thing. The video game developers were concerned that if you were to put ratings on games and if the rating was too high, people wouldn't buy them. But it was actually a benefit because when you actually do put a rating on a game, then you're more free to make the games you want because then there's nothing stopping you from doing that because you're advertising on the game what it is. So because of that, Sony saw an opportunity for themselves when they put out the PlayStation. They wanted more mature games on the PlayStation because they realized the kids who bought an NES and then a Super Nintendo would likely be teenagers or even adults at the time. So because of that, they were encouraging their third-party developers to, make games with an older audience in mind. And Capcom definitely took that to heart and decided that, they wanted to do such a game. So they tapped Tokuro Fujiwara, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name, to head up a new project. And he decided to do a horror game, and he picked one of his old favorites, which was Sweet Home. So Resident Evil actually started as a remake of Sweet Home, but when they realized that they wouldn't be able to, license Sweet Home, remember it was based on a movie, They decided it would just be its own project. For directing duties, he called upon Shinji Mikami, who at the time was making a big name for himself with games like Aladdin for the SNES and the SNES version of Goof Troop. So he had a pretty good pedigree under his belt, and Fujiwara had heard that he wanted to do games with an older audience in mind. But when he came to him with the project, Mikami actually declined, believe it or not, and the reason for that was he didn't like being scared. But because of that, Fujiwara, in essence, just forced him onto the project because that statement for him basically made him feel that he was perfect for the project, because you need to have a relationship with fear in order to make a good horror game, he felt. So after that, development started, and it did not go smoothly. You gotta remember, this was the dawn of 3D gaming, so like everything that was happening in the industry at the time, no one had ever done that before. There wasn't a rule book to go by, and very few horror games actually existed. You had Sweet Home, which was a big inspiration. You had Clock Tower, which was less of an influence. And you also had Alone in the Dark, which was definitely a huge influence on Resident Evil as well. Eventually, they did get the game out the door, and as a lot of you probably know, it went on to be a huge success. The game was a bestseller on the PlayStation, and it will go on to become a signature game for the system. And today, Resident Evil is still going strong too. It's one of the most popular video game franchises of all time, and it's the poster boy for what's come to be known as survival horror. But anyway, I think I've talked enough. Why don't we get into the game? I actually ran down a copy of the PlayStation game, so we get to play it off the good old PS3 here. Make sure I still have sound. Here we go. And if you guys are wondering why I'm doing the stream so early today, it's because I got plans tonight, but I didn't want to cancel the stream, so I just pushed up the schedule a little bit. We'll return to our regularly scheduled programming next week. Like, the ESRB was still a new thing, but they still felt the need to put that in there as just a last-minute warning to parents who are stupid enough to let their kids play this. We'll talk about that live action here in a bit. So, yes, I am playing the director's cut, and I'll explain why later, but we always start with the title screen. And it's fantastic, it's simple but effective. In Japan, Resident Evil is actually known as Biohazard, but they found that they wouldn't be able to trademark that in North America, so they came up with Resident Evil. Supposedly, the name comes from a line in Sweet Home, which refers to the Mamiya Mansion as the House of Residing Evil. Be smart, fighting foes isn't the only way to survive. This is horror, if you say so. But that is a good point, and we'll talk about that later too. The only issue I have with this title screen is the DualShock right there. That's just haphazardly slapped on there. Again, reminder, back in the day, these things didn't exist on here. This was a brand new thing back in the day. I hope I held that in view. Do a quick sound check before I get started. These things didn't. Alright. Do a new game. We'll go original. And I love that. They do that in every single game, and it always sets the mood perfectly. So in the game, you get to play as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. Now, in regards to story, they experience basically the same string of events, with the only major difference being a specific character you interact with. Chris, he'll work alongside Rebecca Chambers, whereas Jill will work around Barry Burden. But the big difference here between the two characters is what they can do. Jill, her weapons do more damage. She has more inventory space, and she has a lockpick which he can use to unlock certain doors. Chris, he can take more punishments, but he has fewer inventory spaces, and his weapons aren't as powerful. So based on that, you can probably guess that Jill is the better character to play as, and she's often seen as the easy mode of the game, which is something I find a lot of people take issue with. They find it sexist, and I think Capcom took that to heart because they sort of reversed it in Resident Evil 2. But I'm going to go ahead and play as Jill. Ominous. July 1998. Raccoon Forest. The stock typewriter sound.
Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we're searching for the helicopter of our compatriots Bravo Team, who disappeared during the middle of our mission. No, I haven't found it yet. Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. There are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten. Bravo Team went to the
hope MLG Panda isn't watching this.
Look, Chris!
Oh great, more live action. And it's in black and white. Evidently, when Japan sent this to the American distributors, they thought it was too violent, so they cut it down and made it black and white so that it would be a little less gory.
However, we soon discovered why.
The director's cut was supposed to have the uncensored version of the game, but when they sent it out to print, someone screwed up and sent the unedited version. Only the PC version has the unedited cutscene here. That was a severed hand. Why am I laughing at this? I thought this was a horror game. Why are you running and gunning? Aren't you guys supposed to be trained military operatives? I feel like there's some weird editing right there. They just stopped as the chopper flew away. Did the dog stop too? What house? Oh, that one. That's more like a mansion. Okay, what the heck is this? I thought I was playing Resident Evil. Did I pop in G.I. Joe by accident? What are those things on your shoulders? I do like everyone's hair, though. Mighty fine. Especially that hair. He probably uses product, though. Mine's natural.
Resident Evil.
They have escaped into the mansion where they thought it was safe. Ooh, yes.
What is this? Wow, what a mansion!
Captain Wesker, where's Chris?
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris is...
What is it? Maybe it's Chris. Now, Jill, can you go?
I'm going with you. Chris is our old partner, you know.
Okay, let me handle this.
Handle what?
Stay alert.
The famous door transitions. Another reference to Sweet Home, but it's actually a smart way to hide loading screens.
A dining room.
Anyone else think that Barry sounds like Adam West in this game? Okay, so several things to unpack here. I'm sure you guys want to know what the hell was up with that live action cutscene. And that was just sort of the style of the time. Resident Evil came out at the tail end of video games, awkward love affair with full motion videos, which, as I said, a lot of times people were really obsessed with the CD technology. So a lot of people did use live action cutscenes in games at the time. Another good example would be Star Wars Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight. But they don't use that for every cutscene in Resident Evil, just the beginning and end. Every other cutscene in the game is CGI rendered, but the reason they opted to use live action instead of CGI was because it was just cheaper at the time. But in order to save costs, they just hired whatever American actors were in Japan at the time, and obviously they went for, the best of the cheapest, so no good actors among them. And that sort of extends to the voice acting too, which is famously horrendous. This game actually coined a term I use called a Jill sandwich, which I use to refer to any line of dialogue that is both poorly written and poorly delivered, and we'll probably get to that during the stream here today. Anyway, let's get into the gameplay here and start with the controls. And right away we get into one of the things I really dislike about the Resident Evil series, and that is its tank controls. So how this works is, instead of, pushing on the joystick and your character going in whatever direction you click, here your controls are a bit more precise, I guess you should say. So pushing forward and back, that controls your forward and back movements. And hitting left or right causes you to turn on an axis. It is why we call these tank controls, because that's how you steer a tank. You don't move it with a steering wheel, you just steer it by adjusting the power to the treads. So you can walk, and if hit two of the buttons at the same time, you can make a character turn. And people who don't read my blog know I'm not fond of this control scheme. It just feels really clunky for anything other than tank. And I understand why the controls were used. A lot of people will tell you that it was because it was to heighten the horror, simulate tripping over your own feet or something like that. But that is not why they use controls. That is completely false. The reason they used them was because for how they chose to do the graphics. So if you haven't noticed here, how they did the graphics here is you have a pre-rendered background that is completely 2D, and then you have a 3D character model superimposed over it. This was a trick they got from Alone in the Dark. When they were making the game, the original plan was to do a first-person shooter, which they realized was just not going to work because they didn't have a lot of experience with 3D games at the time, so it just wasn't coming together the way they had in mind. So then they played Alone in the Dark, saw what they were doing, and decided to do that, because not only would that allow them to do more detailed backgrounds and character models, but more importantly, it would take the need to adjust the camera off the table completely. But with the fixed camera angle, obviously you can't move the camera angle, so how it works is when you go to a different screen, it just changes the angle. Now, let's say you had controls like Super Mario Bros., full analog control, where you just move that around, and your character goes in that direction. Let's say you have, like, the camera's coming towards you, and then it jumps to where it's now at Jill's back. If you had controls like that, your character would spaz out because suddenly your input is rapidly changing. If you want to see this in practice, just play a couple of PlayStation 2 horror games. That was an issue with a lot of them. So by using this tighter control scheme, where forward and back is always on the same button, the input doesn't get confused. That is the reason why they use tank controls. It has nothing to do with hiding the horror. And I also say that because if you've ever played Resident Evil 7 or the Resident Evil 2 remake, you know that those games achieve everything these PS1 era horror games achieve with the fixed camera angles and tank controls with a third-person camera, smooth controls, all that stuff. It's not for the horror, it's just for how they chose to design the game. And I wouldn't hate this stuff so much if it wasn't for the fact that for the longest time, this was the standard for survival horror games. They had to be like this for some reason. It wasn't until Resident Evil 4 came out that they started to break away from it, but even that was a growing pain because when that happened, horror games stopped being horror games. It just turned into third-person shooters for a long time. Thankfully, Resident Evil 7 came out and combined the two. They finally got it right with that. And then the Resident Evil 2 remake perfected it. And I hope they don't go back to the action stuff, because now I'm hearing talk of the Resident Evil 5 getting a remake. And I didn't even like the Resident Evil 4 remake, so yeah, I really don't like the controls in these early games. I hate the fixed camera angles. It's just dated, clunky graphics. It does not need to be like this in order to be a horror game. You can tell there's a lot of design to talk about this game if I haven't even left the first room of the game. It's just like System Shock.
Blood. Jill, see if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this.
Okay, why do you need to examine a puddle of blood? I'm also not terribly fond of these graphics either. Aside from the fact that the mansion just looks really clean, which is weird for the atmosphere, like, I could always sense a disconnect between the character models and the pre-rendered backgrounds because, like, you see light sources in the game, but that doesn't affect your character model in any real way. It's the equivalent of, you know, drawing a background, then drawing something in that environment, and then not putting a drop shadow in there, which at least this game has. It's a very basic one, but you can sort of tell that there were some aspects of it that they hadn't figured out yet. By the time they got to the GameCube with the Resident Evil remake, they finally did get the graphics right. But anyway, what's in here? Hey, what you eating there, bud? Oh, hello, beautiful. Bye-bye. What, is there no music here? The director's cut did change the soundtrack, so maybe there was supposed to be music there, I don't know.
Barry?
What is it?
Barry, it's a monster!
Let me take care of this.
Yeah, congrats, Barry. It took you 3 shots to kill a zombie.
What is it?
Kenneth was killed too. Maybe by this creature.
Who the hell is Kenneth?
Anyway, let's report this to Wesker.
Thought we were looking for Chris. By the way, despite what that cutscene will have you believe, zombies can't actually open doors in this game. That clock is really annoying. Do another quick sound check.
Wesker! Help me look for him, Jill. And don't leave this hall for the time being.
Alright, so now we just gotta make a lap around the room. By the way, you can make your character run by holding a certain button. So here's a good example of what I was talking about earlier. So I'm facing the camera now, but now it switches to the back. Now, if I have a full analog control, as soon as the camera jumped, she would go backwards, and then I'd keep holding it, then she would just keep going back and forth. It would just cause it to spaz out. That's why they use the tank controls.
Find anything, Jill?
Nothing. What is this all about? I can't figure it out at all.
Beats me, too.
Now it's Wesker's time to disappear. I don't know what's going on.
Well, it can't be helped. Let's search for him separately. I'll check the dining room again.
Okay, I'll try the door on the opposite side.
This mansion is gigantic. We could get into trouble if we get lost. We should start from the first floor, okay? And Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
That's a Jill sandwich right there.
Thanks.
I like to keep a counter of that.
Listen, if something happens, let's meet up in this hall.
Already,
This
a lot has
time, be
happened.
there.
Okay, so now we actually get into the gameplay. I'm going to go ahead and equip a weapon. So, how you use your weapon in the game is you hold the R button and then you push your action button, which is X, and that'll cause your character to fire your weapon. And really, the only weapons that matter are the guns. You saw I have a knife here, but that's not going to do you much good. So anyway, so this is where the game really begins. This is where you really set loose in the mansion. Resident Evil is non-linear in nature, so you do have to explore the mansion to find your way through the game, which involves a lot of inventory puzzles and the like. A woman drawing water. Okay. And you can do it at your own pace, which is nice, so... Game is structured pretty well. Definitely not liking these graphics though, with the way the shadow and everything is. It's kind of hard to see that there's a piece of scaffolding right here that I can move over here in order to get up there and get at whatever item this is. A map of the first floor. You'll take it. Yeah, so a map is really helpful in a game like this, that's for sure. That's one of the things I hated most about old non-linear games like The Legend of Zelda and Metroid. It was just a pain to keep track of where you were because you didn't have a map. It is a little clunky that you actually have to go into the menu itself to access your map, when in future Resident Evil games you'd have a dedicated button for that. What is over here? Okay, so I don't know if you guys have ever seen a film called Zombieland, but you really should abide by Columbus's rule in that game, because rules in that film, because that probably will save your life if there ever is a zombie apocalypse. So I got a dead body right here, and rule number 2 on Zombieland is the double tap. So I'm going to take aim. Let's see if I can shoot this guy. Try this again. See? He's alive. I knew it. Hey! That was kind of cool. But it did take some damage there, and I don't want to use my first aid spray right away. I wasted 2 bullets on that, which sucks. Resource management is a huge part of Resident Evil, so you only have so much ammo, you only have so much space for your weapons and ammo, you only have so many healing items, so you gotta use those sparingly, and inventory items also clog up your inventory, so as you're playing the game, you really gotta think of what you want to take with you and what you want to leave behind. Alright. Let's go through this next door. Use the lockpick. You know, these doors don't look too sturdy. Couldn't you just, you know, break them down? Then again, that would seal off zombies. And people who have played this game probably recognize this screen because probably the most famous jump scare is about to occur. Is there anything back here? Creepy stuff. And there it is. Hey! Leave me alone. Stupid dog! You made me look bad. Not as bad as that character model, though, that's for sure. Okay, so right there was actually an interesting bit of gameplay, and I want to talk about this because to me, it represents what makes something a survival horror game. So there's a lot of debate as to what that moniker refers to, and I've always found it a little silly personally because the purpose of every game is to survive when you think about it. But what makes something a survival horror game? For me, it comes down to a lot of specific stuff. Obviously, the resource management, that's a big part of it. But another part of it is actually getting to choose your battles. We saw in the Clock Tower video how boring a game can be if you have just one enemy to fight, but in between encounters of that, not a whole lot is going on. So Resident Evil does something differently where you obviously have a bunch of different enemies to fight. But the thing about Resident Evil is you aren't always forced into combat. And what just happened there was a good example of that. So the dogs burst into the room, and in that situation you have 2 options. You can try to take aim at them with your gun and take them out, or you can run like I chose to do. And you can choose to fight them, and you probably could take them out, but you run the risk of taking damage like I did there, and you'd also waste ammo, which could put you in a bad spot because you never know what's around that corner. To me, that's what defines survival horror. You actually need to have that combat in there, because when you do that, you're constantly running the numbers in your head. Do I want to fight this enemy now? Should I run away? What the heck could be around that corner? That's what creates the anxiety in the player as you're making your way through the game. It's the kind of thing you don't get from something like Clock Tower or Amnesia, where all you can do when you encounter an enemy is run. Because just because you're running from it doesn't mean you're scared of it. Like in that situation right there, part of the reason the jump scare was so effective was because one minute I'm just casually walking through a room, then the next minute there's something in there wanting to kill me and I have to react to it on the spot. I don't have time to think about it. That's the kind of stuff you want to have in a horror game, and that's part of why Resident Evil became so influential, because that's something so many games in the genre tried to emulate. Some of them got it right, some of them didn't, but to me, very few games do it better than a really good Resident Evil game. Alright, so again, the pre-rendered backgrounds here sort of get in the way. You guys probably can't see this, but there is a herb right there. that you probably can't see because the graphics are so muddy here. I'm glad I found this, because this is another healing item that you can use. It's not as effective as the first aid spray, but that'll at least keep me alive a bit longer. So there are some doors that Jill can't pick, and I don't really know what distinguishes a door she can put the lock on versus one she can't. So whatever that is, your guess is as good as mine. What is this? This isn't a safe room. I'm not hearing any calming music or anything like that. Is that even in the first Resident Evil game? Or did that come from Resident Evil 2? I've never actually played this game before. I said I did a long time ago, but I played the remake instead, and I did my review based on that. Sort of embarrassing to admit, but that was almost 10 years ago, so... Okay, so thankfully I don't have to make Jill stick her hands in the toilet. I'd hate to make a lady do that. You know, I'd hate to do it myself. Ugh. Naughty, naughty. You shouldn't play in the toilet. You never know what's behind the corners either. That's another benefit to the fixed camera angles. Like, it's hard to see what's up ahead. And a lot of people, again, say, well, then you need to have fixed camera angles for it to be a survival horror game. If you have a third-person camera, you can't use it to see through walls, dude. You get the same effect. You don't need the fixed camera angles. Yeah, this mansion just isn't terribly frightening, is it? Huh, this looks concerning. What purpose would this have? Tapestry. Nothing unusual. I don't know, that design's a little unusual. And the fact that there's wine here. What is the purpose of this sitting room? An urn with a beautiful picture on it. Nothing unusual. Why would there be a picture in an urn? Groovy. Ah, that's a little concerning. I've seen enough Indiana Jones movies to know that's never a good thing. Yep, definitely getting some Indiana Jones vibes here. Okay, I need to get out of here. And it's locked in. I guess Jill forgot she has lockpicks. Okay, I'll go back. Okay, both doors are locked. Well, I am in a bad spot, aren't I? Okay, I don't see my lockpicks anywhere.
Hey, what's going on?
What do you think, Jill?
Jill? Is that you, Jill? What happened?
Yeah, get me out of here.
Harry, help me, please. The door won't open. Quick!
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down. Hurry! This way!
Yeah, don't just stand there.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
Oh, this should be terrifying, but it's just
Barry,
not.
Didn't you say you're going back to the dining room to do some research? Why on earth are you here?
I just had something I wanted to check.
The man just saved your butt,
Let's
and you're
get
going
back
to
to
complain
searching
about
for the
that.
Captain and Chris, shall we?
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of you might be wondering, why is the voice acting so bad? Did they really think that this was acceptable? At the time, yes. You gotta remember, when voice acting became possible in video games, a lot of people didn't really understand that you kind of needed talent in order to make it work. Like, in the early days of the industry, everyone did a little bit of everything. So game designers were primarily programmers. So when it came time to write stories or do voice acting and stuff like that, they often did it themselves instead of hiring someone else to do it. This was before you had dedicated writers and voice actors. Now, like, if you look at a lot of games that had voice acting at the time, like, it was all horrible. It wasn't until, I want to say, Metal Gear Solid that production values finally got to where you could actually take it seriously. And the primary reason the voice acting in Metal Gear Solid was so good was because they hired professionals. Oh, yeah, if you're going to have voice acting in your game, hire some voice actors. There are plenty of people looking for work. Anyway, let's go ahead and get on to the next one. I did come this way, right? Yes, I did. I need to go this way, I mean. Ah! 2, 3, 4. One, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I guess this is a good opportunity to talk. So I guess this is a good time to talk about the combat in Resident Evil. So all it really boils down to is retreating to what you think is a safe distance and firing away with your weapon. Now, for what Resident Evil is aiming to do, that's fine, but it does make the combat feel just a little bit shallow. The main depth of the combat in Resident Evil is just being aware of how much ammo you have to actually fight enemies, which is why I was counting my shots there. And even if you do count your shots, there's still some frustrations with it, as in after you kill an enemy, they still stand up for a second before they hit the floor. And once they've started that death animation, any bullets you fire at them just whiff. So that's an issue. What they should have done is every time you kill an enemy, they fall backwards. And as soon as you get that kill shot, instead of, that. Another way you know enemies are dead is if there's a pool of blood underneath the enemies. But because of the graphics, it's hard to see that. So I don't know if this enemy is dead, but I have a trick to see. Okay, so both enemies are dead. So this is actually why I decided to play the director's cut version of the game. When you encounter an enemy, if you push R1, that puts you into fire mode. And when you do that near an enemy, let's say I'm facing this way, your character will automatically point towards the enemy. That's the auto aim feature at work. Now, in the original version of Resident Evil, like the vanilla version that was initially released, they took out the auto aim feature from the Japanese version, and the reason they did that was because they were afraid gamers would just rent the game and then finish it and not buy the game. So a lot of time games were made harder in order to combat that because they were just worried about that. You gotta remember, rentals are illegal in Japan actually. And I've always found that really stupid because if a game is really good, you're probably gonna buy it anyway. Especially in a case of Resident Evil where there's just so much side content, you probably wouldn't get to it in a weekend. But anyway, let's take a look at our resources. I only have one shot left, so kind of in a bad spot right now, praying I don't come across anything else concerning. Open the door. And we got more zombies. And now I'm out of ammo, so... Let me show you guys a trick with the shotgun. So you take out the shotgun, you aim up, wait for him to get close. Ah! And blow the heads off. So shotgun is a good one-hit, one-kill weapon, which is why you want to hang on to as much of that ammo as you can. And again, the camera angles kind of get in the way because you didn't know how close that enemy was. And that also plays into why you kind of need the auto-aim system. Because look at this. Do you really know where I'm aiming right here? The zombie could be walking towards me, but if I'm just a little bit to this side, I'm not going to hit anything. So having the auto-aim that automatically directs you towards the enemy, that was something of a requirement. Not sure why they chose not to have that. Well, I do, I just explained it. It was just a bad idea. I'm really glad that they put that back to the director's cut version of the game, and since then, none of these Fits Camera Resident Evil games have tried to go without the auto-aim system. That was an important gameplay feature that they chose to remove for an arbitrary reason. Okay, so what do we got over here? Will you take the chemical? Huh, wonder what that's for. Actually, I think I know what it is for. Alright, so here's another important gameplay aspect. The storage containers. Alright, so as you've seen so far, you have a very limited inventory here, so you can't carry everything with you. And you can't just drop stuff on the floor and leave it behind either, because one, that would be a big pace breaker, because if you needed to backtrack to get something, you would have to remember where it was for one, and then trek all the way back there. So having these storage containers was probably the best way to do this. So got some ammo in here, which is nice. And I can take stuff out of my inventory that I don't need for the moment. And what's good about these storage containers is that there are plenty of safe rooms throughout the game. And every time you come across one of them, all the stuff you put in the last one is going to be in that one. So people make the joke they're subspace storage containers. Which I'm really glad they did, because that cuts down on backtracking. What I generally think the inventory system in Resident Evil is actually really well done, but I do have one critique with it, and that's that your weapons, your ammo, and your healing items, they all share space with items you need for inventory puzzles, and to me that really hurts the pace of the game. So let me paint you a picture. Let's say you're further along in the game, you have a full inventory, and you find a piece that you feel is going to be important for an inventory puzzle, but you want to have that empty space for maybe another inventory puzzle item, or maybe a healing item, or some ammo or something. So you trek all the way back to the nearest safe room, which could be a good distance away, and you put that item in storage. Then you go back to where you were, but then you just round the corner where you found that item, and it's exactly the puzzle that you needed that item for. So you have to trek all the way back to that safe room again, get that item, and then go all the way back. And that just leads to a lot of needless back and forth, which is something that you expect in games like this, but it could have been easily done away with if you just didn't have to share your inventory items with the stuff you need for survival. Having it for ammo, health items, and weapons, like, you have enough choices you have to make for survival there as is. Like, you shouldn't have to clog it up with inventory puzzles either. It just seems like a needless gameplay mechanic to me. I was going to use this to get some health back. And you can thankfully stack ammo. And we're going to switch back to the pistol so I'm not eating away at my shotgun ammo. So when you run out of ammo, your character will automatically reload the gun, and I don't think there's a way to make them do it in-game, but it is better to just go into the inventory screen and reload your weapon anyway. And I got the typewriter here. If I had an ink ribbon. Okay, so the ink ribbon. So the typewriters are how you save your progress. So this is a fixed system. So you can't save anytime you want. You have to save at certain points. And on top of that, you only have so many saves. They're limited to ink ribbons, which you need to save a game. That's another layer of survival in the game, because if you save at the wrong moment, there's a good chance you could soft lock a game, and that's something else that makes you anxious as you're playing the game. Though, it might be going a little too far, I would say. It would be nice if you had unlimited saves, because if you do a system like that, there's a good chance that, again, you'll soft lock a game, which isn't any fun. And also the fact that you have to make it to a save point in order to save your progress. I think that's enough of a deterrence. So anyway, I've talked enough. Let's keep going. Okay, let's see. It's also weird how you have to have your character step up the stairs. Again, it's just part of the systems in place here. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Hey! Okay, so we'll see if they're still alive. They are not. If they were, acid blood. Alright, someone actually commented, Rodney, you're in our territory, yo. What does that mean? If that's because I'm playing in a different time slot, that's because, you know, I have plans tonight. I don't play in this time slot all the time. I usually play Saturday nights at 8. I forgot, I should probably reload. Yeah, if it's because I'm playing a survival horror game. Well, I don't play survival horror games all the time. I'm playing them in September and October because, you know, that's what I always classify as the spooky season. What is behind the blue door? That's a little stark, isn't it? That really draws your eye. So what you're supposed to do here is you're supposed to light that, but you need an item to do that. And that will reveal like a hint or something. I'm not sure what's on it. I can't remember. I don't play the original Resident Evil too often. Again, this is kind of the first time I've ever played this game. And most of the time, if I want to revisit the first Resident Evil, which isn't very often, mind you, I usually play the remake of the game. Okay, so I can't go any further there, so now we gotta go back the way I came. Get a move on. I wonder what happened to those zombies. Oh well. There's another door here. Doorknob is broken, because of course it is. You unlocked it. 3, 4. That guy's down for the count. Yeah, not very exciting combat, but every time you see people showing off gameplay of Resident Evil, that's what you see them showing off, your character just shooting at the zombie. And I feel like that's a very unrepresentative of what Resident Evil is, because combat is something you're trying to avoid if you can. Especially in narrow hallways like this. It's locked. Carving of an armor. One, 2, 3, 4. And I think you can get a critical shot, which will cause their head to explode like they do with the shotgun, but it's completely random, I think. I'm not even sure if that's in this game. Okay, so they're dead. I think there's a door here. I can barely see that. But it's locked. Carving up an armor. Here's another door. Coming up on the end of the show, though. Hey, Barry.
Jill, what's going on? Any clues?
No, but something's wrong with this house.
No Come on.
This hall is dangerous. Maybe it's better to secure our escape route first. There must be a back door somewhere. Let's try to find it first, shall we?
Okay, let's separate again.
Just a moment. I found something.
What is it?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you.
But how?
What else would you use a weapon against exactly?
This.
Thank you. I'll take this then.
What is it? Okay, that's not a weapon, that's ammo, you idiots. Okay, so the statement, there's something wrong with this mansion. What was your first clue? Was it the fact that it's crawling with zombies, or the fact that there was an Indiana Jones style booby trap in there? That is something else that was somewhat innovative with Resident Evil at the time. Like, in regards to the story of Resident Evil, it actually is pretty good. Horrible presentation aside, it is very well written, very well paced. But like the mechanics of it is that it's not really about the personal growth of the characters. It's more about the setting that they found themselves in. You know, the story of the mansion. Why are there zombies here? Why are there booby traps? And later on in the game, you meet all kinds of other weird stuff. Like, something very messed up happened here. And part of the fun of the game is slowly piecing that together, and they do that not just through character interactions and the fact you're constantly coming across all this crazy stuff, but you also find evidence, written dialogue, messages, like giving you an indication of something that happened. It's similar in a sense to System Shock and how it told its story too, and I think that works really well for a horror game because like going into something blind, finding something scary, and not knowing why it's there, like that does unnerve you a little bit more. So yeah, the story of Resident Evil is very effective. And we're coming up on the hour, so we're gonna call it quits here. So I'm gonna have to finish this game and do a review on it because I've just never done that before, aside from the half-assed one I did back in 2014. But so far, I actually am liking what I'm playing. Now, that's not to say I don't already have issues with it, and I've already voiced most of my problem with it. The presentation for the story is just awful. The live action cutscenes, the horrible dialogue, the horrible voice acting. This is supposed to be a scary game, and I've spent most of my playtime laughing at it. That is not a good look for it. I also don't like the controls. I'm not a big fan of the graphics. And that's not just the pre-rendered backgrounds and bits camera angles. It's just that they don't look terribly good, even by the standards of the PS1. The combat is really shallow, but as a survival horror game, it still works just fine. The resource management is simple but easy to come to terms with. It actually does encourage you to avoid fights if you can. Like, it seems to be doing that more than saying, hey, take a shot, kill everything in the mansion. And yeah, with the auto aim, it actually does work just fine. Does that mean you should play this game, though? And I'm going to say no. And it's not because the game is not significant in the grand scheme of things, or that it's a bad game per se. Again, I was enjoying myself as I was playing it. But there's just no reason to play this version of the game. If you want to play the first Resident Evil, I highly recommend playing the remake that they made for the GameCube. Not only is it more widely available than this version of the game, it does everything this game does better. The graphics are better, the story is better told, the presentation is better told, there's more content. They add a different layer to the survival with the introduction of Crimson Heads, where the bodies stay on the floor, and if you leave them there, there's a chance they could get back up and turn into a fast-moving zombie. It's just such a better game. So if you want to experience the first Resident Evil game, I highly recommend getting it on instead. You can get it on all major platforms right now, including PC. So yeah, don't bother with the original Resident Evil. It's really more of a curiosity for people who just want to see how the series got it, or for nerds like me who just enjoy talking about game design. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this content. If you like hearing me talk about video games, please like and subscribe. I do these videos every week. Usually Saturday at 8, but sometimes I will mix it up like I have to today since I have plans. And if there's a game you would like me to cover in the future, please leave a comment. And if it's something I haven't played before, or I think it'll be interesting for the blog, I'll give it a look. Alright, you guys have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow. See you next week.